Good morning, everybody. My name is Phaedra Boinodiris. I'm the global lead for serious games and gamification at IBM. And today I'm going to talk about the power of games. The power of games to teach, the power of games to transform, the power of games to influence. But before I get to all of that, I'm going to talk about gamers. This is actually my nephew. When this picture was taken, he was 6 years old. He plays real-time strategy games like nobody's business. But being 6, he's actually not the average-aged gamer. Can anyone here tell me what the average age of the gamer is today?
35.
Shout. I think I heard 35. Who said 35? Okay, this is for you. This is your prize. I'm going to put this here. You want a prize? Yes, the average age of the gamer today is 35 years old. Some other statistics which might surprise you are that 43% of PC gamers and 38% of console gamers are women. That in the US, well over 67% of heads of households play video games multiple times per week, and this is not what we're playing. Anybody recognize this? I know this, showing this dates me, but yes, this is Pong. And in fact, the games we're playing today are incredibly sophisticated. In fact, they're very adept at explaining complex systems. Think about it. Games like StarCraft, games like Simcity, right? The ability to load balance, the ability to optimize your supply chain. They're incredibly adept. And in fact, companies today are using serious games, as is other organizations, as is defense, using games in order to teach very complex things. So I want to give you some examples of other ways in which games are being used. All of these things listed here, games are being used to market, to recruit, to optimize teams. And serious games are when you use games to do more than entertain, right? Listing all of these things out. Gamification, which is something I'll also cover today, is when you use game design techniques in order to encourage a certain kind of user behavior in something that is otherwise not a game whatsoever. So I'll cover both of these topics. But really the holy grail for both serious games and gamification is really culture change. How is it you can start to use these things to transform cultures, not just to teach somebody something, but really to change their philosophy. So I'm going to give you some examples of how this can be done. Okay. This is a video that shows 3 games which were made to help explain complex systems. This first game was created in 2007, and it was meant to teach business school students the concepts behind business process management. So what this means is business process management is any organization that makes any kind of a product or service. There's a certain set of steps that need to be taken to get this product or service out the door, meeting really key and important criteria like carbon emissions, profitability, customer satisfaction. And so the premise of this game is how do you tweak different kinds of business rules in order to meet those goals? So we had over 1,000 universities within the space of the first 6 months of game launch downloading and using that game as part of their core curriculum. So the next year we created Innovate 2.0 because we wanted to see, is it only students and teachers who are interested in playing this, or would customers and business partners also play? So we created this game which included supply chain management, traffic optimization. We put it online. This actually became our #1 lead generating asset on the internet, just to give you a sense. So in 2010, we decided to create our first city sim game. So if you're familiar with the game Simcity, with this game, you're actually given a city with a certain set of problems, and you've got to figure out how is it that you can use technology in order to evolve the city. So I live in Cary, North Carolina, and I frequently wondered, what will it take for me to buy an electrical car, plug it into my garage, and contribute back to a smarter grid? What does my utility need to do in order to support that kind of innovation? So that's what this game gets at, is what are the steps in order to evolve industries in a certain way? That became our #1 lead generating asset on the internet. So now the top 2 lead gen assets for online marketing were both games. But really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. This is a taxonomy chart that helps to show the entire space. And if you look at that bottom left-hand quadrant, skills training, about 99% of the investments in serious games focus on that little box, right? Games that teach how to fly an Apache helicopter, how to perform a particular kind of surgery, games that teach kids fractions, right? And the return on investment for games in that space has proven to be quite significant. In fact, the Kaufman Foundation has said that when you make a really good game in that space, when it's well executed, it can improve retention of knowledge by over 108% in comparison to traditional means. Why? Because the kids, the people are actually doing, right? It's experiential learning. And so what we see, though, as the opportunity, we actually have an incredible confluence of technology today. We've got very, very sophisticated gaming engines. We've got cloud computing, and now for the first time, we can integrate real data and real processes within these sophisticated games. So what this means is instead of having a game with canned, fake, made-up data, you can actually have games with real data flowing through them, which means you can start creeping up this green arrow and making games for strategic execution and tactical operations, okay? So think about the return on investment for games like that. If you're involved with process innovation, even the most minute increment in process change can lead to huge, huge cost savings for any organization. So that's what we see as the opportunity. Has anybody read this book? Okay, yeah, if you haven't read it, this is part of your homework tonight, right? This is actually required reading for high-ranking military officers today. There's a movie that has come out with Harrison Ford in it, but I think the book is better. But for those who don't know about this was written by Orson Scott Card, a North Carolina author. He actually teaches in Greensboro. And it was written in the 80s, and it's a fantasy book about a boy who becomes the world's greatest military mind by playing games. But unbeknownst to him, he's directly affecting his environment through his gameplay. And I'm not going to say another word because I don't want to give away too many spoilers. But really, this is interesting. And this starts to hit upon what I've been saying, that through gameplay, will actually be directly affecting our environment. And I want to give you an example. I was invited to present at an enterprise architecture summit that was sponsored and hosted by the Department of Defense. And the reason why I was invited was because of all the games we made for business process management, the games I just showed you, right? And right before I got up to present, the 4-star general who's responsible for United States Transportation Command gets up and gives a speech, and he shows a slide. And on this slide, he shows a timeline, and he says, look at what has happened in this country in the last 9 months. We've had volcanoes going off in Iceland, earthquakes in Haiti, tsunamis in Japan, these trade routes being compromised, these battlefronts, and he's listing like 20 different things off. And he says, how can we as an organization have ever been able to be prepared for even a subset of things on this timeline, much less all of them? But he says, even more importantly, given who we are at United States Transportation Command, how can we vet what is the best practice with everybody we need to work with, or with NGOs, with other countries, with all these branches of the military, so that we all know what to do when one of these things, some of these things, all of these things happen, okay? And he says, we're looking towards serious games and smarter systems and smarter simulations as a means to do this. Not only to visualize this complexity, but more importantly, to play through the different kinds of what-if scenarios and get buy-in, okay? You're following me? All right. So I went up and he hands the podium over to me. And I get up and I show them everything I just showed you. I talked about the games, and I showed them this slide at the very end, the Ender's Game slide. And I said, this is where this is going. We've got the capability today to actually flow real data into these games so you can play through the scenarios. And he pulls me aside and he says, what are you doing a month from now? Can you come back and show me what one of these games would look like for logistics innovation? Just give me an example, come back and present this to us. And he said, by the way, it's the DARPA Innovation Summit. I said, sure, okay, 1 month from now. 1 week before the event, I get a call from his assistant who says, the general would like you to invite whomever you want from the gaming industry to make this vision a reality. If you'd like to invite the president of Nintendo, invite the president of Nintendo. I said, sir, it is 1 week before the conference. How am I going to get the president of Nintendo here? He says, don't worry, the invitation is going to come from the Secretary of Defense's office. Who's worrying? Me? I'm not worrying. So I ended up inviting someone I had met at the Game Developers Conference a year prior. The Game Developers Conference is kind of the end-all, be-all of game conferences where all the really cool, new, shiny, whiz-bang stuff is shown, right, for games for entertainment. And I invited this person who had keynoted about his new gaming engine. And for those of you who play strategy games, like Warcraft or StarCraft, this particular gaming engine allows you to manipulate time as a means to best your opponent. So you're not just managing resources, you can jump anywhere within the timeline in order to change your strategy and affect a better outcome for yourself. So imagine, chess, right, in 4D thinking. So I invite him to come and we co-present this idea. And this idea is a game, a multiplayer real-time strategy game that's geospatially specific. So you have maps of the geography that you're actually playing with. And as people are joining the game, as members of your supply chain join, you have access to their real data feeds. Where are their things at what point in time? How much does it cost to move things from point A to point B? And each player playing can stop anywhere within the timeline and swap out information. In other words, I can stop at any point within the timeline and say, instead of using this supplier, I'm going to use this other one. Instead of going into this port of entry, I'm going to go into this other port of entry and play through it again. And the premise is, this game is actually integrated with real business process management software so that as you're playing it, right, you're actually executing and creating a new process that is being vetted by the group. Okay? You see the power of something like this? And I want you to also understand that this also gets to the philosophy, the buy-in is more important than almost anything else. Right? Because if you're working with your broader supply chain, you want them to have had the opportunity to stress test the model themselves. And this is what this gives them. So I've given you an example of what you can do with real-time strategy games. Imagine city sim games, right? A city sim with real city data in it. What could you do with something like that? I mean, aside from disaster response scenarios, which I know a lot of organizations have played with, but what about vetting of public policy? Think about how public policy is vetted today. What could you do with a city sim that not only takes sensor data, right, from this city in order to provide a realistic environment, but also input from the citizens themselves, right? What could you do with something like this? It could be absolutely incredibly powerful. Has anybody heard of the game Fold It? They just did? I missed it. I was in the back, the green room. Okay, another fantastic example. I don't know if the prior speaker told you this, but I was speaking to the professor at the University of Washington, Zoran Popovic, who was responsible for this game. And after he put it out and put out his big press release, I gave him a call and I said, so what is it like to be rich and famous? And he says, my phone has been ringing off the hook. All these venture capitalists, all these pharma companies, they want to throw money at me so I can make a game for them. And he said, but I decided to take this one pharma company's logo and put it on the game, right, to see what would happen. What do you think happened? No one wanted to play. People stopped playing. Why did they stop playing? They stopped playing because the reason they were playing to begin with was because of altruism, right? They wanted their gameplay to affect change, and they didn't want any pharma company to benefit from it, even though it takes a pharma company to get a drug through the FDA. Doesn't matter. They weren't bought in. It's a heart share, right? So if you're thinking about games, right, to solve complex problems, always take the time to really, really, really think about your audience and what motivates them. I thought that was a great lesson. So at IBM, about 8 years or so ago, we did a study with a company out in Palo Alto called Curiosity. And what we decided to do was we wanted to take a good look at a particular genre of game called massively multiplayer online role-playing games. So a great example of it is World of Warcraft. And in particular, we wanted to study guild leaders, very successful guild leaders in World of Warcraft, to see what is it about them? What is it about their personality traits, their skill sets that make them so effective at being guild leaders? So just to give you some examples about what these guild leaders can do, right? They lead huge global virtual teams. They can assemble teams. They can optimize the skill sets within their teams. They can relay mission strategy. They can perform after-action reviews, right? And they also adopt rotating leadership models. Now, why do you think a company like IBM would be interested in that? Right? Why? I've been at IBM 7 years now, and I've met my manager maybe 3 times in person. Right? So all of these capabilities, the ability to do everything these guild leaders do, are incredibly pertinent today. Incredibly pertinent. So we studied these guild leaders, and we actually took a lot away from World of Warcraft and from studying this particular genre of game, which leads me to gamification. So as I mentioned, gamification is using game design techniques in order to motivate user change in something that is otherwise not a game whatsoever. And I'll tell you that this is really picking up quite a bit of speed, right? Quite a bit of speed. We're not the only ones onto this idea, obviously, but organizations like Gartner are saying this is quite big news. The challenge is, how do you execute on it, and how is it that you can use gamification not just to get your employees to kick in another 20 hours of work, right? That's not the real power of something like this. As I said earlier, it's really culture change. So I want to give you an example. Has anybody read Dan Pink's book, Drive? Okay, yeah, so Dan Pink, organizational psychologist, he wrote a book called Drive, which aggregates a lot of other work from other behavioral psychologists in there. But in essence, he says that if you think about the different eras of humanity, right? You think about the agrarian era and the industrial era. What motivated us prior was really the carrot and the stick, right? If you don't plow this field, your family's going to wither and die, and that's what's going to motivate you to do it. But he says, now, with the knowledge worker of today, what motivates us more than anything else is a sense of self-direction. That's what we desire, self-direction. And he says it's based really on 3 major tenets: autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? That's in essence what he tells us. And the problem with those organizations who don't really focus on employee motivation is that 70% of employees are currently completely disengaged. They've completely checked out, right? That the average tenure of an employee in the US in an organization is 1.5 years, and that's it. The turnover is that high because people are that disengaged. Imagine the cost in terms of productivity for organizations, right? Because of this disengagement. So one of the things that we've taken from this is, again, focusing on this sense of self-direction. What lessons can be taken from these role-playing games, right, with their rotating leadership models and the way that the games are played, that can be used to address this problem? And I'll give you an example of one thing that we've done. So one thing we've noticed within role-playing games is the way that this genre of game works is you start off with a particular kind of character class, right? Whether it's a sorceress, a healer, or a warrior. And the premise is that as you play the game, as you gather spells, as you gather weapons, as you complete major milestones, the way that your character looks and is perceived, not just by yourself, but by the entire group, evolves. Right? The way that your character looks evolves. So it's transparent what your skill set is, what your level is, how powerful you are. It's transparent to the organization. So one of the concepts we took is how can you use that thought of getting a snapshot, a visual snapshot of where you're at now in terms of your personality, in terms of your skill set. And as you complete training, certification, projects, milestones, meet with mentors, how do you change over time, right? And have that be transparent to the organization. So that's what we've done. Actually, we've purchased a company called Conexa, which is one of the premier assessment companies in the world. So if you want to find out what kind of a leader you are, or what kind of a salesperson you are, you would take an assessment test from Conexa, most likely. And right before the acquisition of Conexa, I was talking to their CEO, and he said, we were just about to roll out our own serious game strategy. So instead of filling out this bubble test, you play a game to determine what kind of a leader you are, right? Do you lead by influence? Do you lead by power? What motivates you as a person? Imagine playing a game that informs, right? Informs you and others as to where you're at. So imagine you play one of these games. It produces a set of data points about you, hundreds of data points, thousands of data points that form the creation of a visual representation of you at that point in time. We'll call it an avatar. And when I say avatar, I don't want you to think fire sorceress with the flaming sword, right? It doesn't have to be that. It could be something simple, like let's say, as an example, origami. So I complete this, it says, I like to lead through influence, I'm really into tech, here's my personality type, it says I'm a green swan. And the premise is that as I complete major projects, the way that my avatar, my origami looks evolves over time, right? So I have a sense of self-direction. It also tells me, based on where I'm at now, I'm a 55% match for this other job, this evolutionary path over in this direction. So it also tracks what evolution opportunities I have. Now that's from the employee perspective. Imagine from the management perspective. If I can look at an organization and say, okay, this group of star performers, it's amazing how many green swans are in here. What is it about this character class of people? What is it that I need to mimic from their journey so that I can encourage others to follow that path? And again, in the space of seconds, I can look and have that visualization. You can also, from an management or an administration perspective, use this kind of a tool, this kind of a platform as a market economy. So if I'm a CEO of an organization, I'm in desperate need of Java programmers because I've just landed this big project, I can weight those evolutionary paths for Java programmers more than others. So it's transparent to all the people that I'm working with. This is where my need is. I know here's where your skill sets are, but this particular path is where I need you to be, right? And where I see the most optimal fit for you. So it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. One thing I want to get across, because I know gamification, that word is really a hot buzzword these days. And there's a pitfall to gamification that we're seeing now. A lot of people believe there's a trough of disillusionment coming from organizations that are embarking in gamification. And I'll tell you the reason why. A lot of people, a lot of organizations are making the mistake of thinking that what's fun about games is points and badges and leaderboards, right? And that somehow my employees or my customers will work 20 more hours or do this other thing for 50 odd hours just so they can get a platinum badge. And it's those organizations who don't take the time to really think about their audience and what motivates them that are going to slip into this trough of disillusionment because it won't stick, right? So the real key to this is thinking about your audience and what motivates them, and then thinking about games and what's really interesting about them. Because it's not just, the points and the scoring systems. There's so many interesting things that are compelling and engaging about games that can be used. So I actually refer to the bad implementations of both serious games and gamification as chocolate-covered broccoli. And you'll know it when you bite into it, right? I've had a client ask me before, I want a game just like World of Warcraft that teaches database administration, right? Chocolate-covered broccoli, it doesn't match, right? So just, be aware of this, if you're interested in embarking in this space. So why should you care? You should care because gamers are us. This isn't going away. This isn't going away. This is a huge space. The amount of hours that gamers are putting in to playing games, why not leverage that? Why not leverage everything that games can do, not only to compel people to embrace new things, new ideas, but also because they are very adept at explaining complex systems. There's so many things you can do with this, to use games to change philosophies, right? To embrace new ideals, to teach and have custom curated experiences just for you. We're at that point in time where this is possible. So I want you to think about that and consider that. This is my Twitter handle, InnovateGame. I do a weekly podcast called gamesatwork.biz. I don't do it alone. I've got 3 other co-hosts, and we do it every Friday. And in fact, this past week, we had the Serious Games Director for Microsoft on, and he was showing us some really cool things that he's done to get people to adopt new user behaviors in the Microsoft buildings in Seattle. He did a little pilot test where he wanted to see, can he use gamification to get people to drink more water from the water fountain and take the stairs more? So has anybody read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? So the robot who's got the personality disorder, he actually created personalities in the buildings, just to give you a sense. So at each water fountain, he put up a screen, and at the top of the stairs in the elevators, he would put up this monitor, and of course it's able to read RFID badging. So if you stopped and drank at the water fountain, it would make this happy noise, and a smiling face, and if you walked, if you took the elevator instead of the stairs, you would go, He said, he did a 6-month pilot test with this. He had 20 times the amount of user behavior adoption. 20 times. Just by this little simple thing, the personality test. I thought that was so clever, so cool. It's not points and badges. You want to make the thing happy. You want to see a smiley face, right? It is what it is. Anyway, thank you again for your time today.